I just was always a wild, loose kid in my neighborhood. I just always went for mine. I maintained myself. I knew how to hustle, and I definitely wasn't no punk.
These little running around like I wasn't brought up. I was brought up toting slammers. Like, so my belt had to be extra tight. You feel me? Like
the first game, my nigga Punch Jim was popping, homie. Capo, I still fuck with you already know. I shout out to Melly and everybody. I still fuck with my in Harlem. It's all good.
It all started long before the fame, back when the streets were the only classroom that mattered. Jim Jones wasn't just another name from Harlem. He was a kid molded by concrete, raised by chaos, and driven by survival. The world saw a rapper, but the block saw a hustler who had to earn every ounce of respect. He came up in a city where weakness got you eaten, where your belt stayed tight because trouble could come from any corner. That hunger, that restlessness, became part of who he was. But the same fire that pushed him to the top of rap also led him straight into a collision course with someone Brooklyn didn't play about, Raw Diggs. They say every king eventually crosses another, and on one unforgettable night, Harlem met Brooklyn, and the balance of power shifted.
I'm from the era where we sold the drugs, we didn't use them per se. That was the quote-unquote.
Fame in New York don't guarantee respect, and that's something Jim learned the hard way. The streets don't care about your chart position, your jewelry, or who you run with. They only care about presence, and Raw Diggs had that in abundance. That night wasn't about a rap beef. It was about principle. One side represented flash, fame, and Harlem confidence. The other side, silence, power, and Brooklyn discipline. When those two energies met under one club roof, tension filled the air before a single word was said. And when Raw Diggs walked in, people say you could feel it, like the temperature dropped. Conversations stopped, phones went down. Even the music didn't sound the same anymore. This wasn't a setup or a rumor. It was reportedly one of those real New York moments, the kind you hear about the next morning in every barbershop. Raw didn't come to flex. He came to remind everyone, especially Jim, that some rooms still run on respect, not reputation. And from that moment on, the story of Harlem's shine meeting Brooklyn's shadow began to spread like wildfire.
You blood from this day on, when you see us throw it up, you be putting way more work in than half these bloods that be out here and things like that. So you the homie now. When you see us throw it up, that's just that.
At that time, Jim Jones wasn't just a rapper. He was the face of Harlem pride. The Dipset movement had New York in a chokehold. Every club anthem, every chain, every ad-lib screamed success. He was untouchable, at least in his city. But when that Harlem glow crossed the Brooklyn Bridge, the rules changed. Brooklyn had its own code, one that didn't bend for fame. To them, celebrity meant nothing if your presence didn't match your talk. And Raw Diggs? He was the kind of man whose name alone could quiet a whole block. So when word spread that Jim Jones was moving through Brooklyn, popping bottles and talking slick, it wasn't about disrespect. It was about energy. And the streets pay attention to energy. They say Raw Diggs noticed it too. He reportedly told someone close, "Tell him this ain't Harlem, this is home." The message was clear. In a city full of bosses, every block still has its king.
They allege that Heron is guilty of racketeering charges for running a drug-dealing operation in the Gowanus housing development where he grew up. They also claim he was involved in 3 murders and 3 attempted murders.
Before the industry ever tried to label him, Raw Diggs already had a reputation money couldn't buy. His story wasn't built in studios. It was carved into the bricks of Gowanus. People spoke his name with caution, not because of fame, but because of the weight behind it. He was the type of man who didn't chase attention. Attention found him. He'd done time, paid his dues, and came home with an aura that only real street generals carry. While others were chasing record deals, Raw Diggs was focused on loyalty, discipline, and survival. To him, rap was just another hustle. Respect was the real currency. And that's what made this clash feel different. Because when Jim Jones, Harlem royalty, Dipset diplomat, stepped into Brooklyn that night, he wasn't walking into a rap venue. He was walking into Raw's kingdom. The city's whispers were getting louder. Everyone wanted to know, when Harlem's flash met Brooklyn's discipline, who would back down first?
Raw Diggs got 3 life sentences. You heard about this?
I actually seen it on, I think it was on your website yesterday, and I was like, and I feel bad.
You could tell who was really respected by how the room reacted when their name came up, and when Rod Diggs' name was mentioned, voices dropped. Even the toughest guys would get quiet for a second. That kind of respect doesn't come from music charts or social media followers. It comes from living by a code that never changes. So when word reached Raw that Jim was moving through Brooklyn, loud and flashy, some say he took it personal, not as beef, but as a reminder. This wasn't Harlem, and this wasn't about fame. It was about principle. Raw Diggs came from an era where you didn't broadcast your power. You showed it by how you carried yourself. That night, according to witnesses, Raw wasn't angry. He was calm, almost surgical. People say he walked into that club like a man making sure balance was restored. And in that stillness, something shifted. It wasn't about words anymore. It was about energy. Raw Diggs was there to send a message without ever raising his voice. And from that moment forward, every eye in the room knew this wasn't going to be a regular night in New York. The moment Raw Diggs stepped through that door, the entire atmosphere shifted. Conversations froze, bottles stayed half-poured, and even the DJ looked unsure whether to drop the next track. It wasn't the kind of tension you could see. It was the kind you could feel. Quiet, heavy, real. Witnesses said it was like two different worlds colliding in one frame. Harlem glamour versus Brooklyn grit. Jim stood there, still draped in diamonds, but the confidence he walked in with began to fade under that silence. Raw didn't have to shout. He didn't have to threaten. His presence said everything. He asked one question, calm but sharp. "You good, homie? You know where you at?" That line alone echoed louder than any argument could. And in that instant, everyone watching realized this wasn't about dominance, it was about boundaries. Raw wasn't there to embarrass anyone. He was there to make sure respect still had meaning in a city that was losing it fast. Jim nodded. He kept it respectful, and that was it. No shouting match, no fight, no chaos. Just a quiet moment that the streets would never forget. Because sometimes silence speaks louder than action. By the next morning, every barbershop, studio, and block corner was buzzing. People were asking the same thing. Did Raw really check Jim? Some said they saw it. Others swore it was exaggerated, but it didn't matter. In New York, perception becomes truth. And this story spread like wildfire. Overnight, Raw Diggs' legend grew tenfold. He wasn't just a name whispered in Brooklyn anymore. Now Harlem, Queens, and the Bronx were all talking. To the streets, this wasn't a beef, it was a reminder. The kind of reminder that fame doesn't travel everywhere safely. And for Jim Jones, that night reportedly became a moment of realization. Because even when you're at the top, there's always someone who doesn't care about your title, your hits, or your image. Someone whose validation doesn't come from applause. The irony was, Raw never bragged about it. He didn't post, didn't talk about it in interviews. He didn't need to. His silence confirmed what everyone else was already repeating. The streets told the story for him, and that's how myths are born. For Jim, though, it was different. That night didn't destroy him, it humbled him. People close to him reportedly said he moved differently after that. He stopped rolling 20 deep into every borough. He focused more on the music, less on the noise. It wasn't fear, it was awareness. Because after that night, Jim understood something few artists ever admit. Reputation is loud, but respect is quiet, and the quiet ones usually last the longest. Years later, when Raw Diggs faced his federal charges and ended up with multiple life sentences, that moment with Jim still followed his name. It became part of his legend, the story people told to prove he lived by a real code. Even behind bars, his respect didn't fade. Rappers mentioned him in verses. Interviewers brought his name up like he was still in the streets, because what he represented, discipline, loyalty, and unfiltered realness, was disappearing from hip-hop culture. Meanwhile, Jim Jones evolved. He transitioned from street talk to business deals, from beefs to building brands. He learned how to carry Harlem with pride without needing to prove anything, and that shift showed growth. Because sometimes, being checked once is all it takes to change your entire trajectory. Still, every time his name comes up in discussions about authenticity, someone in the comments will whisper, "But what about that Raw Diggs night?" It became that one unshakable story, the shadow in his career folklore. Not to shame him, but to remind fans that even legends have moments that test their foundation. And in a way, that's what makes Jim more human. Because that night wasn't a downfall, it was a reset. It stripped away ego and left only reality. The kind of moment every artist eventually faces when the lights dim and the noise fades. Years passed, but the story never died. Every time Raw Diggs' name resurfaces in documentaries or interviews, that night gets mentioned. The night Brooklyn reminded Harlem that power isn't about status. It's about standing your ground quietly. Even people who never met Raw Diggs respected what he symbolized. He wasn't perfect, but he was consistent. He didn't fake an image. He was the image, flawed, raw, and real. For a city built on pride and legacy, that one encounter became a parable. Fame fades, respect doesn't. Because the streets, they don't care who you were yesterday. They care about who you are when no one's watching. And maybe that's why, even now, people still debate it. Some say it was exaggerated, others swear it happened exactly as told, but that's not what matters. What matters is what it represented, that invisible line between image and integrity. Because deep down, this story isn't about conflict, it's about clarity. It's about the idea that fame can elevate your name, but it can't protect your character. Raw Diggs didn't check Jim Jones out of hate. He did it to protect the balance, to remind the city what happens when flash forgets foundation. And Jim, whether he speaks on it or not, walked away understanding something most artists never do. In a city full of noise, quiet power still reigns supreme. Because at the end of it all, it wasn't about who won. It was about who stood, with honor intact. Harlem had the lights, but Brooklyn had the code. And in that moment, when ego met experience, one truth echoed through every borough. You can't fake real, and don't go anywhere. Click the next video you see on your screen for even more juicy celebrity chaos, betrayals, and stories Hollywood doesn't want you to know. See you in the next one.